Hey there everyone, Paler here, and welcome back. It's time for some more Star Citizen talk, and today I'm following up on last video I did in which I talked about pay to win. The video was shorter than it really should have been, as there's a good 30 minutes worth of talking about here and different thoughts, different aspects of it, because it's not a simple yes or no, as pay to win can mean different things among everybody. Look at the comment section of that video, it'll explain a lot of that. It can mean different things, but it varies greatly. So I wanted to follow up with that. I want to go back and just clarify some of my thoughts on it, answer to some of the common threads, common themes running throughout the conversation section, and all of that. Before we do that, the footage you're watching in the background, this is a Saber Comet, though modified out. Basically, I took two of the Mantis GT 220s, I think they're called, the cannons from the previous video that were on the Super Hornet, and I threw them on to the Saber, keeping the Pyroblast cannons. It's okay. The Pyroblast cannons I really like. They pack quite a punch, and on something like the Saber, they're really good because the Saber has some exceptional turning ability. It can really turn. It also bleeds off negative velocity really quick, so you can do really good at keeping those cannons on target. You're able to optimize those Pyroblast cannons really good. I think putting those cannons on, say, the Super Hornet, while it would still work, I think it would be a lot less effective just because the Super Hornet doesn't have that bleed off of that speed. It's harder to keep the current cannons on target at that close range. So the fact that you can stay in close at like 500, 600 meters, keep those cannons on target, work really well. The Mantis GT220s themselves didn't really do much. They didn't help all that much to the overall loadout. After having tested it a little bit, I think I would go back and I'd pull them off and I'd put something with a little bit more range on there. Right now, this loadout really lacks anything for about 2,000 meters plus. The Mantises just don't have that range on them. So I'd probably put like an autocannon on there or something. Possibly even go back to the Panther repeaters. They're tried and true. We know they work. And that way you would have something to soften the target up with as you close in, starting at like 2,500 meters. And then once you get within 500, 600 meters, you unload with the Pyroblast, finish them off, and keep on going. But it was still a fun loadout that I enjoyed messing around with. Yeah, that's what you're watching. Okay, the pay-to-win conversation, and where do we go from here? There's a lot of different points to cover. I'm going to try and keep this under 15 minutes. We'll see what happens. The one common theme I saw running throughout most of the comments that disagreed with me was the fact that since you can earn these items in-game, that's not pay to win. And I understand where that's coming from, but to me, just because I can earn something in-game doesn't mean it's not pay to win. For me, pay to win's not a simple, this means pay to win, this does not mean pay to win. There's some definite gray areas in there. And I suppose you can put Star Citizen in that gray area of the high-end pay to advance, pay for advantage, into the pay-to-win conversation. It's somewhere in that middle there. And if you want to really put your stick down in the dirt and be like, no, this is not pay-to-win, all right, that's fine. For me, like I was saying, there's a lot of gray areas and all that. Just because I can acquire something in-game, the amount of time, the amount of effort I need to put into that needs to be calculated into the equation before I can determine yes or no if it's pay to win. Obviously, we don't know how long it's going to take. Maybe you'll be able to unlock a Super Hornet with an Aurora. You start off with an Aurora, unlock a Super Hornet in 5 game days. 5 days of gameplay, whatever. So say 30 hours of gameplay, which is a hell of a lot of playing. Let's undo that thought process. 5 days of playing the game, say 10, 12 hours. 30 hours is way too much of gameplay for 5 days. Let's say you could do that. Okay, then the game is definitely not pay to win, but then the game has a whole bunch of other problems. The game's going to run out of ships for people to buy and acquire very, very quickly. And this is something, like I said, we really don't know exactly how they're going to do it. So let's just take a hypothetical situation. Well, before we do that, let's first admit very clearly, there are some people that need a carrot on a stick in order to keep playing some games. I am not generally one of these people. I can play a game like Battlefield, and I enjoy Battlefield for the combat. I enjoy the gameplay of Battlefield. The fact that there's more weapons to unlock, it's a nice addition, but it's absolutely not something I come back to. I'll continue playing the game with no weapon unlocks left to get just because I enjoy the gameplay. But there's definitely a non-insignificant portion of the community that need that next item, that next thing jangling in front of them to be working towards, to be unlocking for them to stay with the game. It's one of the big complaints a lot of people have about Overwatch. Overwatch does have unlocks, but they're just cosmetics for the most part. Cosmetics, voice lines, things like that. And for some people, they just can't get into Overwatch because of that. There's no upgrades for them to acquire that are not cosmetic. Again, that doesn't bother me at all. I play it for the gameplay. The same thing is going to happen with Star Citizen. I play Star Citizen because I like the ships. I can spend an hour just wandering around in the hangar, moving ships in, moving ships out, messing around with like weapons on them, seeing how they look with different loadouts, just looking at the weapons on them. To me, there's a ship porn element of it that I really like. Beyond that, I enjoy the flying. I enjoy taking the ships out, getting into dogfights with them, getting into fights. I find that to be fun. Without any additional upgrades, I could still play Star Citizen. But that's not going to be for everyone. Some people are going to need that next carrot on a stick item down the line, right? So, the reason this is important is we have to look at ships and how they're going to progress. Let's not stick with combat. Let's actually change it over to cargo, to trade type focus. Just because there's a lot fewer ships. The combat side, there's a lot more ships on the combat side than there is on the cargo side. So theoretically, we start off, and if we were going to move on from the beginning player, it starts off with an Aurora with a cargo pod. Well, the logical progression for me would be Aurora to Avenger, though I could see them skipping Avenger and then going right to Cutlass. So Aurora, Avenger, Cutlass, Freelancer, Caterpillar, then probably Merchantman. We'll see the Merchantman when it actually comes. What CIG is going to have to do is they have to find this correct balance where people are acquiring things and upgrading things at a rate that is acceptable, but those last few ships are going to require a significant amount of time investment. So I would say you would need to go from something like this. From day one, when you start off with your Aurora, you're looking at 3 to 5 days. So 8 to 10, maybe 12 hours of gameplay till you get your first upgrade, till you're in that Avenger. The Avenger would then take, say, 4 to 10 days, a little bit longer, so another 12 to 20 hours of gameplay to get up to the Cutlass. At which point things start to slow down. Not significantly, but they slow down. You'll be with the Cutlass for like 3 weeks or so. So 60 hours of gameplay, give or take, 40 to 60 hours of gameplay to get to the Freelancer. The Freelancer, then, you're going to have that for probably 2 or 3 months, at which point you'll be hitting the Caterpillar somewhere between 4 and 6 months into the game. After you started off from day one, you would be getting to the Caterpillar 4 to 6 months, and then another 6 months to 8 months after that, you would finally get to the Merchantman, if that is going to be truly one next up. So a year to a year and a half after the game launches, you would be getting up to the highest end that we currently have of the well, I guess I missed the Hull series. Let's ignore the Hull series just so the analogy keeps working. Roughly a year after launch, you're hitting the Merchantman type ship. To me, that seems about where they need to go. And there would also be a lot of little small incremental upgrades. So you hit the Freelancer, and it's not 2 months, 3 months until you hit the Caterpillar. In that time, you'll be upgrading the Freelancer. You'll be swapping out the engines. You'll be upgrading the shields on it, maybe improving the weapons on it, in order to tweak it a little bit more. So there'll be small incremental upgrades within that line while you're going. But, now if we're talking pay to win though, has someone that did not start on right on day one with a Merchantman, with a Caterpillar, do they not have a 6 month or a year lead on someone that started off with the Aurora? To me, that is still pay to win. It's not terrible pay to win. It's kind of that's kind of unfortunate pay to win, but it's still pay to win. You got 6 months, a year head start on someone starting off day one with an Aurora. Yes, it's great. In fact, it's awesome that you can earn and acquire and move up to these ships through playing the gameplay. That's awesome. Good. It has to be that way. If it wasn't being that way, I would not have invested nearly as much money in the game. If the fact that the ships I currently own, other people couldn't acquire them, that would be a turnoff for me in terms of the overall gameplay. But it doesn't change it from being pay to win, in my opinion. Just because the term pay to win doesn't mean to me, it does not mean guaranteed win. There are always going to be some small exceptions that break it. It also doesn't mean winning forever. It doesn't mean that someone with a time investment can get there and eventually even it out. Those things can be overcome. Those guaranteed win and no way of acquiring without paying money are the part of like iOS games that keep me from playing many iOS games. Star Citizen definitely, it is not along those lines. It is not terrible pay to win like that. It's just the unfortunate reality of the way the game has to be in order to exist, pay to win, in my opinion. Let's continue on. Another common theme was, depending on your play style, it doesn't really matter. And this one, there's a little more validity to me for it. There was some people that talk about, maybe all that I want to do is fly around and see the sights, and for that, the Aurora or the Mustang works just fine. Okay, that's fine. I can't really tell you you're wrong there, because you're not wrong. That's perfectly fine. But I don't think that is going to be near the majority of the community. And when I come at things like this, I'm talking about what I think would be for the average player. If you're someone that literally just wants to role play, getting up in the morning, getting into an Aurora, flying to your job, going back home at the end of the day, getting out of the Aurora, yeah, the Aurora is perfectly fine for that, and there's no real need for a higher end ship, so the maximum performance of your gameplay you got for your $45 investment. But I don't think that's the majority of players. You also saw people, there was a gentleman talking about someone that took an Aurora using a racing wheel and was just blowing up Super Hornets and Sabres and all that. And I have two thoughts on this. One, either the video is fake. Either like they were playing against busted AI or players that weren't truly fighting back and were giving up. Or the other possibility, and legit possibility, that guy is just an insane ace. And just because 1, 2, 3% of the population can take an Aurora and school someone in a Super Hornet, to me doesn't change the fact that an Aurora is not as strong as a Super Hornet. It just means there are exceptions to every single rule. And just because there's an exception doesn't, to me, void the fact that it's pay to win, in my opinion. So yeah, I can't really go much further than that. It's just because there's exceptions, just because you could be one of those people that just wants to fly an Aurora back and forth in our play going to work, or just because you might be one of those 1 in 10,000, 1 in 20,000 pilots that can do anything with an Aurora that no one else can, that doesn't change the overall fact for me. One that did come up that I did want to directly address, piracy was brought up. Can piracy be used as a balancing mechanism for the pay to win? You go out and you steal the ships you want. And this is a very interesting concept. I don't know, this could be a whole other conversation on its own. While I understand where they're coming from, and I think that is an interesting idea, interesting way of looking at it, it brings up another problem with how are we going to handle piracy within the game. I think most of us want a game where piracy, PvP, all of that happens. But do we want a game where the best way of acquiring ships, the most reliable way of acquiring ships, is to steal them? To me, that could very quickly turn into a game that just is full of griefing and annoyances that are no longer fun. That's a complicated one to talk into. I see where they're coming from with it, and it's definitely a valid way to look at it, but it leads us into a whole other hole of ideas of where the game could potentially get into trouble. And this has to do with kind of maybe the accessibility video I did, where do we maybe need like 1/3, maybe a quarter of the systems to be safe zones so people can play, but at the same time then people won't maybe take their more expensive ships out for chance of losing them, in which case piracy is less effective. But we definitely don't want, at least I don't want piracy absolutely everywhere. I don't want the game to be nothing but griefing and stolen ships. We don't want it to be Grand Theft Starships. It's an interesting thought. I'd love to hear more people's thoughts on that one. As I could see, there's pros and cons to both sides of it. What are some of the other thoughts? The fact that the galaxy is going to be big and you can just go off wherever you want to go. So this one to me again ties into the person that's role playing and flying their Aurora to and from work or whatever. Yes, ideally the system, the galaxy is going to be big enough that if they do it right, you should be able to pretty much isolate yourself from a lot of other players. It's going to be a massive universe, and even if there's 10 million people playing, if the universe is even remotely modeled to a 1/10 size scale, there's a lot of empty space out there for those 10 million people to occupy. You should be able to kind of get off by yourself to where the people that bought their ships are no longer influencing you. Just because you can isolate yourself, though, from that influence, again, to me, doesn't change the fact that the other people have a significant advantage for paying up front. It just gives you a gameplay loop in order to get away from it if you like, which, again, is really good. It's why, although I consider it to be pay to win, I don't consider it to be terrible pay to win. And, alright, I think that mostly covers it. Is there any other big ones I wanted to talk about? No, I think that about does it. The last thing I really want to iterate before we leave, though, is, again, finally, I do consider the game pay to win, but I consider it to be almost ideal situation pay to win and a necessity pay to win. I said this at the end of the other video. There was no publisher that was going to back this game. This game was not going to be done for the $3 million or whatever it got out of Kickstarter. It wasn't going to be done for $20 million or even $30 million. This game, when it's all said and done, is going to be $150 million plus. So the fact that we have those elements together, I will give the game a chance and accept some unfortunate pay-to-win elements for the game to exist. I'd rather it exist and have some of these pay-to-win elements that they try and put systems in to counter, rather than it not exist at all. Oh, I forgot the other one. Shit. All right, we're just gonna go back a few seconds here. One of the other common ones was the fact that bigger ships have higher operating costs, and we're gonna have to see how this actually plays out. I understand they've pointed this out a lot. People talk about like a javelin, and the javelin's operating costs are gonna make it ineffective for a lot of things. The way I understood this to be is essentially there's going to be almost tiers of missions. There's going to be missions designed around and with rewards around entry-level ships. Your Aurora, your Mustang, your 300 series, and all of that. And since those ships are cheaper to operate, you can go out and these missions, although their return are less, you're going to make a greater profit. Whereas if you take something like a Javelin and try to do what would be like a Tier 1 mission, the reward isn't there to cover the expenses. But there also needs to be high-tier missions, Tier 10 or whatever missions, with much higher rewards to make justification for these ships beyond just PvP basis. There has to be a PvE side of this. Now, that's how I understood it. I'd love for someone to give me a link where that's completely different, where no missions are going to operate. Show me where there's not going to be any PvE content that can cover the cost and make a profit with the higher-end ships. If that's the case, I think that's a mistake. There should be missions out there, high-tier missions, that you can only really do with these bigger ships. And for doing those bigger missions, you get a much higher reward. Right? That's how I've understood the way they were going to do it. And maybe, again, maybe I've misunderstood. But I understand there's going to be entry-level missions, low reward, but ideal for small ships. Middle missions, something for the medium-sized ships, bigger reward, to better cover those ships' operating costs, but still not enough to cover the big ships' operating costs, and so on. They progress up that way. That's the way I understood it. So, yeah, let me know in the comments down below. I think that about does it for today. We're now well over 15 minutes, like I didn't want to go there. But that should clarify most of my points of view on this. Until next time, though, this has been Power. Thanks for watching.